I think I had achieved my goal even more than I could have imagined. I wanted to do one production car. I got to do 3 cars in 5 years, which is, it's kind of unheard of for any one person to be able to do so much, have such an impact and do so much work that gets out, gets to production in such a short amount of time. And I just didn't want to be the chief of all the Indians. Like the guys that I hired in with, or the guy that one of the guys I hired in with now is running Chrysler Design.
Mm-hmm.
He's the boss of the whole thing, and great. Like that's, great. Ralph's a great guy, and he should have that job. Like he's a leader, and his work is excellent. And he was somebody who stayed around, went through all the permutations of who owned Chrysler and what the management structure was, and he survived all that, and now he's got the ability to shape the future of that company, which is great. But I wanted to do other things, and one of the things that I wanted to do was to have a company where I could go from my mind's eye with an idea to the market and have it be as pure as I imagined it in my head when I saw it on the shelf. Obviously, when you work at a large company doing, creating products or even providing a service, there's a chance for it to get compromised. And so because of my background was in fine art, I tend to look at everything that I do with that, with that philosophy. Two people don't do a painting. One person does a painting. It wasn't Van Gogh and Theo. It was just Van Gogh, right? So it wasn't Rembrandt and his brother or Rembrandt and his cousin. It was just Rembrandt. So, looking through that lens of how can I have these ideas go from my mind's eye to the world, the only way to really do that is to be in control of the process, which is, becoming an entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
And I always wanted to do that too. My 2 highest values are my creativity and my personal freedom.
Hmm.
So if I want to achieve those values in the world, if I want to make those values real, then I have to own my time. And the only way to own your time is, not to have a boss. So if anybody out there, is sick of working for somebody else, that might be why, is because you want to have control of your time. And of course, I want to have control of the creative process and how my work is presented to the world.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're a painter, you have those things, obviously, but you have to be able to eat as well. And so coming out of this experience where I've got, a lot of attention for the work I did at Chrysler, I was able to look at some consulting opportunities, which I took advantage of. But I had this idea of like, what can I put into the world? What product or service can I create where I can really, spread my entrepreneurial wings and see what happens. And so that's what led me wanting to leave Chrysler. My father told me I was insane, but he said, do what you want. It's your life.
Yeah. Well, good. So you left Chrysler, and then how did you get that first opportunity, which I think ultimately led to you being able to design, interiors for Boeing Aerospace and Gulfstreams? But how did that first connection happen?
There's a company called Walter Doran Teague, which is the oldest industrial design consultancy firm in the United States. In the history of industrial design, which is it's sort of an applied art in a sense that
Mm-hmm.
you're using art to make products, consumer products, better. And this started in the sort of early 20th century. And you had guys like Raymond Loewy, you had Teague, you had Henry Dreyfuss. These are sort of the godfathers of industrial design as a profession. And most of these iconic logos, like the Shell logo, that was done by Raymond Loewy. And but before that, people, there wasn't a profession called industrial design. And so Teague was one of the oldest one, or was the oldest one, and as a consulting firm. And they were in New York, and I wanted to go back to New York. And I thought, all right, this is a good fit because they do transportation stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
they had projects that were coming on board, like Gulfstream, like Boeing. Mm-hmm. We were looking at Honda Jet, the small plane that Honda makes. That was an early concept that was developed at Teague that I was slated to work on. So there was some crossover between what I was doing at Chrysler from a transportation design standpoint and what I would be able to do at Teague. Most of the consulting design offices in New York, they don't do a lot of transportation design. So, they're doing lamps and tables, and then that's all great. But, I thought, how cool would it be to go back to New York and, do some transportation design in New York City, which, again, it's a pretty rare thing. And so Teague has the contract to do Boeing interiors. So I got to do a lot of concepts for a lot of different airlines, which was great. And that's how the Gulfstream project came about, because they got the contract to do the Gulfstream 5, the G5 interior. And I just, again, it was applied all of my automotive knowledge and skills and experience to working on trying to create this $35 million interior, basically. I mean, when you have, when I was at Chrysler, if I wanted to put a nicer taillight on a car, they told me I couldn't because it was going to cost another nickel per car, and they couldn't afford that.
Yeah.
When you're working on a $35 million plane and you want to make the tables out of moon rocks, they're like, sure, yeah, no problem. Do whatever you want, And so it was kind of the opposite, experience. The most exotic material you could think of, if you thought it would be cool to put in the plane, you could do it because, they just add it to the price. It doesn't matter. So it was, it had the same kind of creative energy, and it was a very free sort of place to be, in a sense of doing creative work, but I still had to be at work at 8 o'clock every morning. And that part was kind of grating on me, in the sense.
Yeah. So with those projects that you did in the years after you left Chrysler, what would you say has been the most, like the project that you had the most fun doing?
Oh, well, that's a tough question. I had a couple of projects. I mean, I loved working on the plane stuff at Teague. When I left Teague, I left because I got a call from Vector, who had sort of a checkered past, if you know anything about cars. Vector started as a vision of an art center designer, a graduate from art center. He wanted to build the world's greatest supercar, basically a jet fighter for the road. And his company went public. He lost control of the company. And it was kind of a messy ending to that phase of the company's history. This Indonesian conglomerate came in and bought it, and they hired a bunch of guys from the UK who knew how to put cars together. And they called me and they said, look, this is going to be an American supercar. We want an American designer on the project. And they flew me down to Jacksonville, Florida, where the headquarters was. And I became the consulting designer at Vector Automotive, which was great because I got to drive, Lamborghinis and supercars the whole time I was down there. And I got to work with this amazing, amazing group of people who were all hired guns like me, but they all had this history of working on some of the most important iconic cars, of sort of our generation, of the 80s and the 90s and that sort of thing, and even the 70s. And the guy that ran the program was Ian Doble, and he was the former director of Lotus Formula One. And if I could have been anything other than what I became, I would have wanted to be involved in Formula One. And I didn't know that I could do that. Like, I didn't know I could get on a plane and fly to England or fly to Maranello and sweep floors and eventually, become part of a Formula One team. I wish someone would have told me that when I was growing up in New York City. Somehow Detroit just seems so much closer than, going to the UK or going to Italy. Right. But so Ian had all these stories about running Formula One, running Lotus and Mario Andretti and just all these guys that I grew up watching on TV. And he was one of those guys, right? So you work 15, 16 hours a day, and then you go to dinner and you tell me the story about this, tell me the story about that. He was there. He was the guy. So that was really fun. We got to do a lot of time on track, a lot of test driving on the track in and around Georgia at Savannah Speedway, and do a lot of development work on the car, which I didn't do at Chrysler. I did a lot of aero work at Chrysler, worked in the wind tunnel a lot, but never did any real development work on the car, how it should turn in, that sort of thing. And that's just something that car designers usually don't get to do, and I got to do that at Vector as well. So that was a really, really fun project. And then, then MacCase kind of started. I think I did a small project between my time at Vector and starting MacCase, which was called Studio Pack. There was a need for a backpack for artists. I started teaching at Pratt, and I went to this huge art supply store on Canal Street in New York City to buy a backpack because I wanted to ride my bike to school to teach. And nobody made a backpack for artists. And I just thought, wait a minute, I'm a designer. I can figure this out. This is not that complicated. It's just some cut and sew, you know. And so I did a bunch of research. I realized that nobody had ever done this, and sat down with a friend from Detroit who is now in New York, going to another art school in New York to become a fine artist. And he was an ex-Ford guy. And the two of us got together and we designed this thing called a Studio Pack, which we got a patent on. And that became the default backpack for artists. And that was the beginning of my entrepreneurial career. I took Studio Pack from 1 product to 10 products in the first year. And it was a thrilling ride. It was just an amazing experience to learn how to do business internationally, to learn how to bring product in, to learn how to do, you know, international, you know, monetary transactions, all these different things that, you know, teach you in art school. You know, I got my entrepreneurial feet wet, trial by fire, I guess. You know, people say, well, why should I go to business school and, you know, get this expensive degree? Well, they'll teach you a lot of concepts. They'll teach you a lot of sort of methodology, but they don't teach you operational skill. You get that on the job, right? And so that's what I was able to do, is to get all this operational skill very quickly and, you know, and very early on, because I was wearing all the hats basically. Yeah. And it was fun. That was also a really fun thing to do. And that ultimately became MacCase. The parent company of MacCase is called Design Star. So it was a Design Star Studio Pack. And then when I created the first case for the Apple iBook, we came up with the MacCase brand. And so the MacCase brand is still under Design Star as a company. But it's, you know, that the cut and sew, access to cut and sew, you know, facilities and that sort of thing, how to bring product in, all that stuff came out of Studio Pack. So when I got the idea for MacCase, I just thought, okay, I know how to do all this now. But this market is so much bigger. The problem that I have with the art materials market was that nobody in this supposed creative industry wanted anything to do with anything creative. So it was really a struggle to sell a innovative idea like a backpack for artists to the people in the creative industry, in the creative materials industry. And I just got really frustrated really fast. And it's a very small market too. And that was being killed off every day, a little bit at a time, by the internet and by digital technology. So, so I just needed a bigger field to play on, and the Apple space gave me that field.
Ah, okay. So is that why you ultimately chose to go and create, you know, a case specifically for Apple computers? Is it because of the market, or was there another thing you were looking at that you saw an opportunity with?
Yeah, no, the big opportunity, and I don't know if you're familiar with the Blue Ocean Strategy book. It's if you're an entrepreneur, it's a really good book to read, because you can test whether your idea fits this criteria, and the criteria is kind of a blueprint for success as far as giving you the best shot for success within a given market. And MacCase was a Blue Ocean Strategy before I realized that there was a thing called that. I mean, I don't think these guys wrote this book and came up with that term back in, you know, the late 90s. But what it was Apple customers, typically back in the late 90s, they appreciated design. There was still this divide. It's not so much now, but there was still this divide between the Windows world and the Mac world. And they really didn't get along. There was this, you know, Bill Gates was Big Brother, Steve Jobs was a messiah, you know, this kind of nonsense. And so you have, you know, this David and Goliath kind of mythology that was built up around the two companies. But Apple customers appreciated aesthetics. That's why they used Apple. Most of them were creatives. They were doing things on the Mac that were not accounting and spreadsheets. They were doing things that were creative. So I thought, well, this is my tribe, right? These are the folks that are going to appreciate, just like my client base, just like my patrons when I was 17 years old, 18 years old, selling artwork in New York. They appreciated what I did. They looked at my paintings and said, yes, I want to own that. I get that. It moves me. And so I thought, because these people are more aesthetically oriented, if I can design something that's so different and so radical and so endearing and charming, versus all the other sort of boring black computer cases that were at, CompUSA or Staples, places like that.